We're almost done. We're almost done. Pattern number 5. This one's easy. So how do you know you've got a problem in production? Problems in test don't matter at the end of the day. It's the problems that get to production that are the problem, because they're the expensive ones to fix. So how do you know in production you've got a problem? Again, it's not a trick question.
You can use a service like Bugsnag.
Okay, that's a good one. I've not used that. What's it like?
It's alright. I mean, it shows you where your logs are, and you can, if you've got the version set up correctly, but
okay,
maybe a few dependencies around there.
All right. So that gives you some helping hand.
Yeah.
But you said something else in there that was that's the key thing I'm looking for, and people have mentioned it. Logging. How many of you write logs in production? How many of you switch your logs off in production? It happens a lot, switching logs off. But the thing is, you shouldn't have to. Make sure PHP 7 errors and exceptions go in your logs. Make sure you log them. Because if you're throwing them, that's because something's gone pear-shaped. You need to know about it. Now, does the exception alone tell you why you've got a problem? No? All right. Why not?
You don't know what the input was.
Why not?
Unless you record that in the exception.
Okay.
There's no record of it.
Right. So those of you who write log files, how do you write to the log file? What code do you call? Do you use PHP's error log? Do you use something else? What do you use? Anyone use monologue? A couple of people? Okay, so monologue's been around a very long time. It's one of the oldest composer packages. It's written by the guy who created Composer, by the way. And it's a logging API, and it's the de facto standard for PHP. It's fantastic. It's got lots of inversion control, so you can make it do practically anything. You could do your emails and everything for you if you wanted to. Just don't ask me how to configure it to do that. That's a different problem. It's very powerful. And one of the things you can do with that is you can say, I've got this error, I want to log this, and I want to log this information to do with this error, and I want it all to appear in the logs. And it's important you capture that, especially early in my career. I've lost count on the number of times I've had to log into production to find, and sometimes edit code on production, to fix faults. I've done that. Not for years, thankfully, but I have done that. Yeah, there's quite a few knowing smiles around the room. It's not an experience I've had alone then. Yeah. But so a lot of people say, well, if your tests are good enough, you can, if you've got a fault, you can just look at your logs, recreate it in test, and then ship a bug. How often does that happen? Lots of skeptical faces. Yeah. It can happen, but most people's logs aren't good enough. So make sure your logs also have all the information you need in to fix the bug. Remember, we're telling the library how to fail. We're passing in the failure handler. So when we write that code, we know the context that the failure has happened in. We have all that information available. All we've got to do is make sure we tack it in onto the exception so it gets written to the logs. That's all you've got to do. You can't always fix a production problem first time round. NQS system took years and years and years and years of patching before we had it stable. And we went through a cycle of, oh, it's crashing, we don't know why, let's add some more logs in this area because we've got a rough idea where it's crashing, to capture more information, to tell us what the robustness problem was that we couldn't figure out and see. So don't be afraid to add more logs, targeted logs. Monolog has a facility where you can switch on parts of your logs. There's some sort of key structure where you can say, I want logs only for this particular area of your code and stuff. Go look it up, Monolog's fantastic. So you don't have to have your full debug log appearing in your log files all the time and then filling up your disk space and a new robustness problem. You can be targeted. My favorite thing with Monolog is it's got a module whereby you build all these logs up in memory, but they only get written out if your app crashes, which is fantastic. Because that means if you've got debug messages, etc. in your log, you know it's because you've got a problem. They've appeared because that's the path through to the exception that ended up being thrown and getting logged. That's a fantastic halfway house between logging everything and having no logs at all and wondering what the hell to do at 3 AM. But the thing is, PHP doesn't log things by default. If things reach all the way to the fact that PHP itself has crashed, it will write something to your logs. But you don't control that at that point. You've given up. PHP is just doing the best it can at that point. You want to make sure the information's in the logs, so take ownership of it. It's your thing, do it. How many of you install a default error handler in your code? Okay. Do you all know what a default error handler is? Okay, not sure everybody does. Yes?
So you mean the set exception handler and set error handler functions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, set error handler in particular.
Yes.
So before we had exceptions, PHP would put notices, warnings, and fatal errors that you can't recover from. But if it wasn't a truly fatal error, it would call a callback that you'd provided when you set up your code. And you set up this callback by calling a function called set error handler. And it would pass in all the information about where you were in the code when it crapped out. It's always handy to put one in there so you're capturing these logs and writing it yourself. The vast majority of PHP still runs on the old error handling system, what I call the legacy error handling system. So you want to take charge of these, and you want them to appear in your log, not in wherever PHP is logging them. And if you're running PHP inside Apache, PHP doesn't even own that log file. It's Apache writing those logs out. Anyone tried processing an Apache log that's full of PHP errors as well? It starts to get annoying. So it's an idea. It's nice to have logs for specific things. Have a PHP log, have an Apache log, and then match them up. Default exception handlers. How many people install one of those?
I was using the framework, but
That's fair enough. Yeah, that counts. That counts. Yeah. Again, it's the same thing, is make sure if they've got a problem, it's getting into a log file. Now, the other thing is, I'm saying log your errors. I'm surprised no one's yet said, well, hang on, does that mean your logs are full of errors that you don't care about? I mean, how many of you ship code to production and when you're looking for a fault, you're going past lots of errors you know are there because they've been there 2 or 3, 4, 5 releases. Some of them have been there longer than you have. Yeah, and you're just ignoring them. That happens a lot. That's a very common occurrence. In my experience, fix them. In my experience, fix them all. A system should operate with none of these robustness bugs appearing in your log files. Yes?
Does that mean your notice level's up to the max?
For PHP legacy errors, do you mean? Or do you mean with log levels for handling exceptions?
The set error level, right?
Yeah, the error level.
Set error level, yes, I've got that up to the max.
Yeah.
In the C days, you used to be able to, compiler options used to be optional. In fact, they probably still are, but they certainly used to be optional. You had to switch all the compiler warnings on, otherwise your code would compile, and then when you ran it, a mess. Same idea with that is get your system telling you everything that's going wrong. Because the thing is, you don't know what's hiding behind them. That's the other thing. The bugs that you can see may be symptoms of other bugs. If your robustness work is a work in progress, as nearly everybody's is, when you clear these bugs out of the way, there may be more bugs. You don't know what's hiding behind them. And the other thing is, if they're in there for years and people come and people go, people get complacent to these bugs. They may actually be serious, but you don't know about it because you've seen them so many times you become snowblind. That happens. So fix everything. Make things pristine. Honestly, it actually, in my experience, it feels slow and painful when you start off, especially if you've inherited a system that's doing this all the time. But once you've cleaned them up, you save so much time because you know if there's a problem in the log, it has to be addressed. It's serious. So know that your code has failed. Don't be ignorant of it. Log your errors, log your exceptions. Make sure your logging can be used in productions. Make sure you don't have to switch it off. Because production's where the bugs that hurt you happen. Obviously in test you'll want as much logging on as you can, but if your bugs have got past test and then happen in production's where it starts to cost real money because you're dealing with inputs from other systems, from customers and things like that. There's no point logging something if it doesn't tell you anything other than, hello, an exception happened. That's not enough. make sure you're capturing the information. File name, line number, make sure those are in there. Inputs to functions, make sure you've captured those. You're limited only by your imagination about what you can put in there, but those are the basics. And fix everything. Clear out what you can see to see if there's anything else even worse hiding behind, because you may only be seeing symptoms, not real bugs.